Let's break the theory question in coding interviews. Can a static class have a constructor? All right, hello everyone. So I'm going to answer the question so I can break it up for you. The answer is both yes and no. So let's see why. Okay, let's talk about static classes. So here I'm going to write the static class, and I'm going to use a public static class. I'm going to call it SQL connector. And here I'm going to have a public static void function, which is going to be connect. So this is going to be connecting to the DB, right? Now I'm going to do console write line, and I'm going to write line connecting. And also I'm going to say thread.sleep, and I'm going to be sleeping for 2 seconds. Good. So being that as a static class in this namespace means that everybody, and not just in this namespace, depending on the property that you're going to set, so it's either going to be protected, private, or whatever, you can have a call. So you can say SQL connector.connect, and it's going to be completely valid. Now, here you need to understand one thing. First of all, we're not creating any instance of SQL connector, as we should properly. Now, if I do this, so if I remove the static over here, this thing is not going to work. So let's just public class and public void connect, and this has a problem. Now, this has a problem because nobody had allocated any memory for this function yet. So in order for me to allocate the memory, what I need to do is I can say var a is going to be equal to a new SQL connector, which is going to be my word for allocating memory. And then I can say a.connect. As you can see, this is going to work properly. If I say F5, I am going to say connecting. And after 2 seconds, I'm going to break execution in this code, which is what we expected. However, if I say public static class over here, we know that in static, we allocate memory only once, but we're not really able to create an instance. So if I'm not able to create an instance, chances are that we're not having a constructor. So we can actually see that by rebuilding our solution. Go here on this box and say ILSpy. Or you can use, I think you could use something like C# decompiler in Google if you write it down. So let's find our own assembly, which is going to be console.app1, and I'm going to go to SQL connector, and you're going to see here that I have only a method. Now this is the common infrastructure language manage, meaning that this is managed memory, but I do not have any CTOR. Now I'm going to write also something else. So I'm going to write a public class SQL connector normal. And here, if I actually say, I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to rebuild the solution and open it in the intermediate language SPY. So if I see the intermediate language SPY, I can go to SQL connector normal, and you can see this CTOR over here, which is again, of course, managed by the common infrastructure language. Now, if I open it up, nothing is really happening, but this thing is placed by your C# compiler just because we need somebody to allocate the memory for it. So in comparison to my SQL connector, we do not see anything as CTOR here. We are seeing connect, which is going to be this connect function over here, but we're not seeing a constructor. Therefore, we're not able to instantiate anything. Now here, of course, we have connect and we have connecting, and I'm going to say connecting from instance. So if I have to take a guess, and I don't know in a coding interview, based on this, I'm going to say my static class doesn't have a constructor. So I'm pretty confident now that we are not having a constructor. However, what about if I go here onto the static class and I write some function with the SQL connector name? So you know that a function with the name of the class is the constructor of this class. So I say CTOR, tap, and you can see public SQL connector in my static class. Here we can say static classes cannot have instance constructors. Now this is very interesting because if we cannot have instance constructor, is there any other constructor that we can have? Now this is very interesting. If you're talking about SQL connector normal, when I'm writing a CTOR, every single time that I'm actually going to be instantiating a thing for SQL connector normal, I am going to end up with this constructor first. So this is the function that's going to be running first, right? And each and other function is going to run after I have run my constructor. The constructor is there for the common language to actually allocate the memories. For example, here we need to allocate enough bytes for the common connecting from instance, because if you're looking at the IO spy, you're going to see that we're loading this string into a registry. So we already have the number of bytes that we need to be allocating. And of course, if I'm instantiating this SQL connector normal 30 times, I'm going to have 30 constructors because each and every instance is on its own. So what other constructors do I know? Now, I know that there are static constructors. So if I write static over here, you're going to see that this squiggly line is going to say access modifiers are not allowed on static constructors. Let's remove it, and boom, there we go. Now it is actually allowed. It's very interesting for me, if I actually rebuild the solution, open the code in IOSpy, am I going to see something different? Now I'm going to go again on my namespace, console app1, and I'm going to go to the SQL connector, and keep in mind SQL connector normal, because connector normal is the instance where we have constructor, and now SQL connector is having a static constructor. So let's actually see what's happening. SQL connector normal is having a CTOR, right? And even if I remove this CTOR, by the way, the common infrastructure language is building its own. So let's actually see that in action. I'm just going to rebuild the solution again, and I'm going to open the code in IO code spy. Good. So now I'm going to go to SQL connector normal. Currently, we do not have any constructor over here. As you can see, we just have the method connect. But here we're having connect and we're having a CTOR. Now, this is placed automatically. But what is going to happen if I go to SQL connector? Now, you remember that the static class doesn't have a constructor. And if I try to add this CTOR over here, I'm actually getting an error. But now I've added something called a static constructor. And let's see if this is going to decompile into something else. And as you can see, here's actually very funny. We are having the constructor currently. So now the answer is switching from no to yes. So what is it actually? Is it yes or no? Well, it depends. Static classes can have static constructors. That's it. So they can have constructors, because if you decompile them, you're going to see the same thing. And if I actually open this in another tab and I open SQL connector over here, you're going to see that pretty much everything is the same. So I have hide by signature, special name, then we have RTS special name, instance void CTOR, and here we have RTS special static void. So this is a static void CTOR. So this is a static constructor. And of course, here we have public hide by signature, but if I go here and I create something like a private constructor in order to implement the singleton pattern, which is a bit more advanced, but doesn't matter, it's obviously going to be private over here. So very, very interesting. Yes, static classes can have constructors, but the constructors that they have are static. So one final question might be like an additive. What is a static constructor? Now we know that static actually allocates memory only once. So if I have in a class, public class, SQL connector normal, then I have a static, let's say int n is going to be equal to 0. This static here is going to be allocated just once for every single time that SQL connector normal is going to be created. So I can run through the constructor 30 times because I have 30 instances, but I'm not going to have 30 multiplied by 4. So this is going to be equal to 120 bytes. I'm not going to have 120 bytes. Rather, I'm going to have only 4 because of this static keyword over here. Good. So static means that we allocate memory only once. What is going to mean if I have a static constructor over here? So I'm going to say console write line. And this is a static constructor. And now I'm going to actually use the static instance. So SQL connector dot connect. And if I run it, F5 here, you're going to see this is a static constructor and then connecting. So very interesting is that I'm actually using SQL connector dot connect. And instead of me going straight to connecting and waiting 2 seconds, I end up having this is a static constructor. So once you actually use the static instance, it's going to go to the static constructor. Static constructors are used to initialize stuff. Like, for example, we have a logger. and we want to log stuff in our application, either errors, info, warnings, whatever you want, we can have a static constructor for this situation. We're going to instantiate different things that we're going to be needing in our static class, because sometimes in execution, we need stuff dynamically. We don't know them ahead of time. And I'm going to come to the static constructor, allocate them, and then when I'm using something else like SQL Connect, so I can control D over here, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to go to the constructor twice? Well, you're going to be surprised, because it's not. It's going to say this is a static constructor, connecting, and then connecting. So only once, right? When we use a static class, it's going to enter its static constructor, which is going to be the first ever function that enters before calling connect. And the second time we're actually calling connect, it's not going to enter the constructor, because obviously it's going to say, all right, you had your chance to initialize everything. I'm not going to give you this chance a second time. So yeah, static classes can have constructors. They're static, and there's a difference. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye.